Hello and welcome to Dissecting Philosophy with Dr. McDonald. In this episode, I'll be reading and discussing the section The Convalescent in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And it has a really nice discussion of Nietzsche's concept of the eternal return going on. So, let's get started. Section 1. One morning, not long after his return to the cave, Zarathustra sprang up from his bed like a madman, cried with a terrible voice, and behaved as if someone else was lying on the bed and would not rise from it. And Zarathustra's voice rang out in such a way that his animals came to him in terror, and from all the caves and hiding places in the neighborhood of Zarathustra's cave, all the creatures slipped away, flying, fluttering, creeping, jumping, according to the kind of foot or wing each had been given. Zarathustra, however, spoke these words: "Up, abysmal thought, up from my depths. I am your cockerel and dawn, sleepy worm. Up, up, my voice shall soon crow you awake. Loosen the fetters of your ears. Listen, for I want to hear you. Up, up. Here is thunder enough to make even the graves listen, and wipe the sleep and all the dimness and blindness from your eyes. Hear me with your eyes too. My voice is a medicine even for those born blind. And once you are awake, you shall stay awake forever. It is not my way to awaken great-grandmothers from sleep in order to bid them go back to sleep. Are you moving, stretching, rattling? Up, up. You shall not rattle. You shall speak to me. Zarathustra the godless calls you. I, Zarathustra, the advocate of life, the advocate of suffering, the advocate of the circle. I call you, my most abysmal thought. Ah, you are coming. I hear you. My abyss speaks. I have turned my ultimate depth into light. Ah, come here. Give me your hand. Ha! Don't. Ha ha. Disgust, disgust, disgust. Woe is me. So for the convalescent then, the word convalescent means recovering from an illness, and that sort of sets the tone overall for this section, where Zarathustra himself is going to be recovering from an illness, and what that illness is going to be, we're going to find out as we go along, is precisely that of humanity and humanity's cruelty. But before we get to all that in the upcoming section, it sort of kicks us off in such a way that Zarathustra's initially in his cave, and then all the animals come to him, and it's quite a humorous image when you think about it, because it's almost like Zarathustra is like a Disney princess, in the sense of you have in the classic Disney movies, especially like Snow White, she's just suddenly in the garden tending to the flowers or whatever she's doing, and then suddenly she'll break into song, and then there'll be a back and forth between Snow White and a little songbird and so forth. And we've had this as well at the start of this section, where suddenly all the animals are coming to Zarathustra in very much this Disney-like quality. And then we have this whole up from the abyss. And what the whole up from the abyss is really all this, which is going to set us up for section 2, is precisely that moment when he's going to be overcome with all that negativity. And that fits nicely into all the last sentence of that section. Disgust, 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 woe is me. So then, continuing on into section 2 to get into all the juicy stuff. Hardly had Zarathustra spoken these words, however, when he fell down like a dead man and remained like a dead man for a long time. But when he again came to himself, he was pale and trembling, and remained lying down, and for a long time would neither eat nor drink. This condition lasted 7 days. His animals, however, did not leave him by day or night, except that the eagle flew off to fetch food, and whatever he had collected and fetched, he laid upon Zarathustra's bed, so that at last Zarathustra lay among yellow and red berries, grapes, rosy apples, sweet-smelling herbs, and pine cones. At his feet, however, 2 lambs were spread, which the eagle had, with difficulty, carried off from their shepherd. At last, after 7 days, Zarathustra raised himself in his bed, took a rosy apple in his hand, smelt it, and found its odour pleasant. Then his animals thought the time had come to speak to him. "O Zarathustra," they said, "now you have lain like that 7 days with heavy eyes, will you not now get to your feet again? Step out of your cave. The world awaits you like a garden. The wind is laden with heavy fragrance that longs for you, and all the brooks would like to run after you. All things long for you since you have been alone 7 days. Step out of your cave. All things want to be your physicians. Has perhaps a new knowledge come to you, a bitter, oppressive knowledge? You have lain like leaven dough. Your soul has risen and overflowed its brim." "O my animals," answered Zarathustra, "go on talking and let me listen. Your talking is such refreshment. Where there is talking, the world is like a garden to me. How sweet it is that words and sounds of music exist. Are words and music not rainbows and seeming bridges between things eternally separated? Every soul is a world of its own. For every soul, every other soul is an afterworld. Appearance lies most beautifully among the most alike, for the smallest gap is the most difficult to bridge. For me, how could there be an outside of me? There is no outside. But we forget that when we hear music, how sweet it is that we forget. Are things not given names and musical sounds, so that man may refresh himself with things? Speech is a beautiful foolery. With it man dances over all things. How sweet is all speech and all the falsehoods of music. With music does our love dance upon many-coloured rainbows." "O Zarathustra," said the animals then, "all things themselves dance for such as think as we. They come and offer their hand, and laugh and flee and return. Everything goes, everything returns. The wheel of existence rolls forever. Everything dies, everything blossoms anew. The year of existence runs on forever. Everything breaks, everything is joined anew. The same house of existence builds itself forever. Everything departs, everything meets again. The ring of existence is true to itself forever. Existence begins in every instant, the ball. There rolls around every here. The middle is everywhere. The path of eternity is crooked." So, in the next part then we have Zarathustra lying down for 7 days in this state where the animals are taking care of him and looking after him. And in quite a surprising moment as well, suddenly we have the animals talk to him. So now we have almost like a Dr. Dolittle situation where, of course, Dr. Dolittle can speak to animals, and suddenly the animals are now speaking to Zarathustra. And the animals are now saying, now that you've woken up, come on, get yourself together, come out of this cave, come out of this state that you're in, go out into the world, and it'll refresh you. And you'll be among nature in this garden, and it'll just be lovely. And then Zarathustra replies, oh, how much refreshment it is that what words you say. And so we have this whole relation into nature and the world as being very much therapeutic in order for us to try and get out of this situation that he's in right now with the illness for his mental health condition that he's in. Go and have a little walk, get out, stop being in such a stupor as you are, stop being so down. And then we have quite a lovely discussion about music and also language at the same time. And it's that whole relation, he says, well, music also has that power of rejuvenation in a way. As he says there, for me, how could there be an outside of me? There is no outside. But we forget that when we hear music, how sweet it is that we forget. Because here we're seeing the benefit precisely of a idealistic plane that's sort of created when you lose yourself in just the enjoyment of music itself. As he says, there is no outside of me, which is to say, well, I exist in the world, and Nietzsche's very much defending here the materialistic view. There is no outside of me. There is nothing more than just the world, but music has that special quality when you listen to it. And you can be in a really terrible mood. Suddenly you just start listening to it and it uplifts you. It makes you feel good. And suddenly you're no longer in a terrible mood anymore. And it's also the same thing with speech as well, which here we have that interesting relation into language, because language itself is a thing that's applied to objects in the world, and it's also providing that ideal space as well. Whenever you read a good book, you again have that fantastic transportation away to this idealistic plane, into this whole other world that's created, and just the enjoyment of reading the story and so forth, that has all that fantastic, again, therapeutic qualities about it. And then from the discussion of music and language, do we then start to touch upon one of the key things of this section, which is Nietzsche's concept of the eternal return, which has popped up before, but here it pops up again now. And it's that whole discussion, everything returns, the wheel of existence rolls on forever, everything dies, everything blossoms anew. And it's really thinking about just time is cyclical. Hence why he says eternity's crooked, because we think so much in terms of past, present, and future in a very much linear fashion. But the way in which Nietzsche thinks about time is, again, cyclical. And a great example, an easy example, is precisely just to think about nature and the way that nature operates on the cycle of seasons, where you have that continual repetition of spring, summer, autumn, winter. And you can apply this to knowledge as well as something that's cyclical and it'll come back to itself, and interests will come back. And what is challenging there is traditional philosophy, and as I've said in previous episodes as well, what always traditional philosophy tries to do is create that stable basis and stable foundation based upon metaphysics, because then it'll be pure, eternal, everlasting, and so on. But here we have the idea of everything being cyclical, and again it builds upon that idea of knowledge being like sandcastles from the previous episode, where we have that whole washing away old knowledge, old ideas, and allowing for a newness to emerge at the same time. So, let's continue on then. "Oh, you buffoons and barrel organs," answered Zarathustra and smiled again. "How well you know what had to be fulfilled in 7 days, and how that monster crept into my throat and choked me, but I bit its head off and spat it away, and you have already made a hurdy-gurdy song of it. I, however, lie here now, still weary from this biting and spitting away, still sick with my own redemption. And you looked on at it all. Oh, my animals, are you, too, cruel? Did you desire to be spectators of my great pain, as men do? For man is the cruelest animal. More than anything on earth, he enjoys tragedies, bullfights, and crucifixions. And when he invented hell for himself, behold, it was his heaven on earth. When the great man cries out, straightway the little man comes running. His tongue is hanging from his mouth with lasciviousness. He, however, calls it his pity. The little man, especially the poet, how zealously he accuses life in words. Listen to it, but do not overlook the delight that is in all accusation. Some accusers of life overcomes them with a glance of its eye. Do you love me? It says impudently. Just wait a little. I have no time for you yet. Man is the cruelest animal towards himself, and with all who call themselves sinners and bearers of the cross and penitents, do not overlook the sensual pleasure that is in this complaint and accusation. And I myself, do I want to be the accuser of man? Ah, my animals, this alone have I learned, that the wickedest in man is necessary for the best in him, that all that is most wicked in him is his best strength, and the hardest stone for the highest creator, and that man must grow better and wickeder. To know man is wicked, that was to be tied to no torture stake, but I cried as no one had cried before. Alas, that his wickedest is so very small. Alas, that his best is so very small. The great disgust at man, it choked me, and had crept into my throat, and what the prophet prophesied, it is all one, nothing is worth while, knowledge chokes. A long twilight limps in front of me, a mortally weary, death-intoxicated sadness which speaks with a yawn. The man of whom you are weary, the little man, reoccurs eternally. Thus my sadness yawned and dragged its feet and could not fall asleep. The human earth became to me a cave. Its chest caved in. Everything living became to me human decay and bones in mouldering past. My sighs sat upon all graves of man, and could no longer rise. My sighs and questions croaked and choked and gnawed and wailed by day and night. Alas, man recurs eternally. The little man reoccurs eternally. I had seen them both naked, the greatest man and the smallest man, all too similar to one another, even the greatest all too human, the greatest all too small. That was my disgust at man, and eternal recurrence even for the smallest. That was my disgust at all existence. Ah, disgust, disgust, disgust. Thus spoke Zarathustra, and sighed and shuddered, for he remembered his sickness, but his animals would not let him speak further. So then in the next little bit, we have this image of Zarathustra having bit the head off a monster, and it goes back into a previous image that we had, and it was the one where Zarathustra was standing over a young man who had a snake in his mouth, again, who had tried to bite onto his throat, and the young man got himself out of the situation by biting the head off a snake that was doing it, and liberated himself from biting its head off. So we have this image come back again, but with Zarathustra himself, and what exactly is choking him is not the snake, but rather the monster is his great disgust at man. It choked me and crept into my throat. And so it really touches upon that key line then, and what the prophet prophesied is all one, nothing is worthwhile, knowledge chokes. Because what it's picking upon for this whole thing is quite interesting, because it has that relation back into how knowledge itself is constructed against the backdrop of trying to sort out human cruelty. And so we have this whole relation into Zarathustra himself saying to the animals, "Are you cruel for having looked over me in the first place whilst I was in this state?" And all the different descriptions of human cruelty as well that happens. We have crucifixion as an example, and then we have bullfights, and then animal cruelty at the same time. And from all that, he would say, well, where is humanity's benefit coming out of all that? And to add another point that Nietzsche doesn't use as well, you can equally say, well, look at humanity's destruction of the environment equally. But what is the benefit? Who tries to shape and mold humanity into where you would like them to go? And that's kind of one of the questions that sort of drives philosophy in a way. And one ways in which philosophers try to distinguish themselves from everybody else, because philosophy, especially in Plato, takes upon a really niche where it's only philosophers who have the correct knowledge about how things work and the way things are, and can see all the problems with humanity. Therefore, who is going to be the best people to go and sort out all these problems is not going to be politicians, it's going to precisely be philosophers. And that's just a very, very brief going over the whole argument that Plato makes in the Republic. But we can see from all that, at least within traditional philosophy, there's this whole move towards creating systems of knowledge, creating ethical models, all the ways to try to shape and structure and organize humanity so they're not cruel anymore. And what is the thing that everything hinges upon is that Nietzsche doesn't say it explicitly, rather we potentially arrive in a very big ethical problem, because he says, my animals, this alone have I learned, that the wickedest in man is necessary for the best in him, that all that is most wicked in him is his best strength and the hardest stone for the highest creator, and that man must grow better and wickeder. And immediately reading that, you go, what? Because you run precisely into all those ethical problems. Do we have an advocation of all the immoral things and immoral actions that someone can commit? And do we have suddenly then a justification of all those cruel things that's happened in the past, such as the crucifixions and so on, that he gives examples of? What exactly is it talking about here? And this is why he doesn't mention it explicitly, but rather is touched upon desire itself is the key thing that acts as the knife edge between both being the best person and also the worst at the same time. Because within Orgard's religion, we have suffering precisely coming through desire, and it precisely illustrates all the negative qualities about desire. And therefore, what is the purpose of all that? For someone to therefore look upon their own body and design processes within their own body in an incredibly negative way, in order for them to then adopt, well, what is the positive is all the spiritual aspect of that. Here we have quite a similar thing that's happening within this point, to say, well, here we have a lot of negativity about humanity, but also simultaneously desire is an incredibly positive thing. People need the desire to want to beat cancer. People have the desire to win the race that they're in an athletic competition. People have the desire to go create artwork and so on. So it's not just simply, can you just pigeonhole desire itself into just a completely always negative thing that's always going to lead into negative consequences. But hence why it always teeters on that knife edge, because it's that principle of desire that can go either way. And then we can see that whole relation into the statement again that knowledge chokes, because everything's focused upon death in the afterlife again and disgust of the world. And here we have precisely Zarathustra having again that great disgust and can't see anything positive. And this is when we have the animals come back in to try to knock some sense into Zarathustra. So let's continue on. Speak no further, Convalescent, thus his animals answered him, but go out to where the world awaits you like a garden. Go out to the roses and bees and flocks of doves, but go out especially to the songbirds, so that you may learn singing from them. For convalescents should sing, let the healthy talk, and when the healthy man too desires song, he desires other songs than the convalescent. Oh, you buffoons and barrel organs, do be quiet, answered Zarathustra, and smiled at his animals. How well you know what comfort I devised for myself in 7 days. That I have to sing again. That comfort and this convalescence did I devise for myself. Do you want to make another hurdy-gurdy song out of that too? Speak no further, his animals answered once more. Rather first prepare yourself a lyre, convalescent, a new lyre, for behold, O Zarathustra, new lyres are needed for new songs. Sing and bubble over, O Zarathustra, heal your soul with new songs, so that you may bear your great destiny that was never yet the destiny of any man. For your animals well know, O Zarathustra, who you are and must become. Behold, you are the teacher of the eternal recurrence. That is now your destiny. That you have to be the first to teach this doctrine. How should this great destiny not also be your greatest danger and sickness? Behold, we know what you teach, that all things reoccur eternally, and we ourselves with them, and that we have already existed an infinite number of times before, and all things with us. You teach that there is a great year of becoming, a colossus of a year. This year must, like an hourglass, turn itself over and over again, so that it may run down and run out anew, so that all these years resemble one another in the great things and in the smallest, so that we ourselves resemble ourselves in each great year, in the greatest things and in the smallest. And if you should die now, O Zarathustra, behold, we know too what you would say then to yourself. But your animals ask you not to die yet. You would say, and without trembling, but rather grasping for happiness, for a great weight and oppression would have been lifted from you, most patient of men. Now I die and decay, you would say, and in an instant I shall be nothingness. Souls are as mortal as bodies, but the complex of causes in which I am entangled will reoccur. It will create me again. I myself am part of these causes of the eternal recurrence. I shall return with this sun, with this earth, with this eagle, with this serpent, not to a new life, or a better life, or a similar life. I shall return eternally to this identical and self-same life, in the greatest things and in the smallest, to teach once more the eternal recurrence of all things, to speak once more the teaching of the great noontide of earth and man, to tell man of the Superman once more. I spoke my teaching, I broke upon my teaching, thus my eternal fate will have it. As prophet do I perish. Now the hour has come, when he who is going down shall bless himself. Thus ends Zarathustra's downgoing. When the animals had spoken these words, they fell silent, and expected that Zarathustra would say something to them. But Zarathustra did not hear that they were silent. On the contrary, he lay still with closed eyes like a sleeper, although he was not asleep, for he was conversing with his soul. The eagle and the serpent, however, when they found him thus silent, respected the great stillness around him, and discreetly withdrew. So then, rounding off the section, we have an absolutely fantastic discussion of the eternal return or the eternal reoccurrence. So, the animals then come back to him and quite like the start of the section, then say, get hold of yourself, go out, you need to freshen yourself up, you need to sing songs and make yourself new songs to go and sing. Go fashion a lyre for yourself to play, in which you can have a nice prance around in the garden. Again, there's quite a nice sort of Disney princess Zarathustra prancing around in the garden as he does, image that pops into your head when you read it. But then, of course, we get to the crux about the whole concept of the eternal return, everything reoccurring an infinite number of times. And one of the important things that comes out of it is not, as he says, to a new life or a better life or a similar life, but to the exactly identical life. So then we have, of course, the criticism against organized religion, where you say, well, in the afterlife, you're moving towards this whole aspect of a better life for yourself. So it's not that, not to a new life. So eternal return doesn't work in the same way that reincarnation would work, where you have the posh word for its transmigration of the soul, with the soul leaving the body and then returns back into another body. Whatever it be, of course, not necessarily another human being, it's potentially an insect or an animal, so forth. And not even a similar life, but to the identical same life. What is that trying to say there? If you had to return back to exactly the same life and relive it over and over and over again, what would that be for you? And this is the question that Nietzsche wants us to start to think about in a really deep way here. Would your life now, exactly as the way you are living it, be a complete joy for yourself, or would it be an absolute living hell for you if you had to live your life over and over again for eternity? And so, what it wants people to do then is to therefore answer the question, if I had to do it over and over again, it would be an absolute joy. Then, of course, hits into a nice problem of that. Does that mean a self-destructive life? As the punk motto is, live fast, die young. And that would be, again, the ethical problem with it. Would that be something that would be enjoyable for a life, if to have to repeat that over and over and over again? And so it wants people to have the desire to improve their situation, not in a self-destructive way, but as very much building upon the previous ideas of self-improvement and striving for an individual to think upon their own current life, think upon their own current situation, and think to themselves, if I had to be stuck in this job, if I had to be stuck in this situation for a repetition that's going to be endless, would I want that? And so it's, of course, striving for people to go and chase their dreams as well. If you want to go do something, you should therefore have that design process, be a musician, be an artist, be a hairdresser, whatever it is, the thing that is gonna make someone happy for the rest of their entire cyclical process, if you had to live it again and again and again. So that wraps up this section of The Convalescent with one of the longest discussions of the concept of the eternal return that's popped up in Zarathustra so far. In the next episode, we'll be continuing on into the section of the Great Longing, where we have that discussion of Zarathustra talking to his soul. Many thanks for listening to the episode. I hope you enjoyed my discussion of the section The Convalescent in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Feel free to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/dissectingphilosophy. Also, feel free to drop me an email at my address, dissectingphilosophy@gmail.com. You can tip me a coffee at ko-fi.com/dissectingphilosophy. And lastly, I can be found on Twitter at I am a rubberman. Many thanks for listening to the episode, and I hope you'll join me next time.